Seikai no Shokun. Welcome to Igor's Dojo, the training ground for honing your Japanese language skills. The topic of today's video is the third and final set of particles in the Japanese language. These are mostly concerned with counting and certain forms of motion besides having a few other functions to perform in a sentence. I will be explaining most of these particles in pairs in order to provide you with a better grasp on their usage as well as to illustrate the differences a bit better. As you can see, the first set is to and ya, or the counting particles. After that we have e, which we will be examining in detail solo, and that is the motion particle, and after that the final are the kara and made particles, or the from and to particles. Now, here is the customary vocabulary overview section for you to analyze. This time with a bit more words, since this video will be a crowning accomplishment in our particle series, where we will see all of them in action, so to speak, and complementing each other in our example sentences. Once again, you are welcome to pause the video here in case there is a word which you do not understand, or you can always return here once the video is over to review them in detail and maybe practice them a little bit more in case there is a word or words that you are not familiar with. I will also give you another minute to familiarize yourself with the final set of these words in our vocabulary overview before proceeding to our first particle. Alright, are we ready? Okay, now we are moving on to our first particle. Our first particle in today's video is to, whose usage is fairly simple. When attached directly after the noun, it acquires the English meaning of and or with, depending on the context in which it is used. However, when to is used as a conditional, the usage is a bit more complicated, but it is a topic for a future video to cover. When it comes to counting, to is reserved for those lists of objects where there is a clear and or predetermined number of them on it. If the opposite is the case, then ya is used, conveying the meaning of among other things and etc., because it deals with lists that have an indeterminable amount of objects to count. We will see this difference further illustrated in the examples that follow, but the most important thing for you to remember here is that when you have a list with a predetermined number of objects to count, you use to. However, if the opposite is the case, you use ya. Now let's see those examples. Now, I will first pull up 3 sentences that illustrate the most basic and the most important meaning of to, and that is to act as and in the Japanese language. As you can see from the first sentence, Chugoku go to Fransu go ga hanasemasu. I can speak Chinese and French. We are using to connect here, so to speak, Chinese and French, and after that mark them with ga as our ability that we can talk them. After that, we have Yoshida-san wa hon to zashi o kaimashita. Once again, hon and zashi, or the book and the magazine, are connected with to, and after that they are used with o to subject them to becoming an object of our transitive verb, in this case kau, or to buy. This time we have formed the topic of our sentence with wa. After that, we have Yume na Nihon no shii wa Tokyo to Kyoto desu. Famous Japanese cities are Tokyo and Kyoto. Once again, we have formed here with no the ownership relationship between Nihon and shi, and created out of them the topic of our sentence with wa, and used to once again in its basic context to connect them and act as and in our sentences. So the most important thing for you to remember here is that the basic usage of to between two nouns is to connect them and convey the meaning of and. Now, in our fourth sentence and in our fifth sentence, we have something different. Tomodachi to denwa de hanashite imasu. I am talking with my friend on the phone, and in our final sentence, Yamada-san wa hoka no shain to soudan shite imasu. Mr. Yamada is consulting other company employees. We see here the second most frequent usage of to, and that is to convey the meaning of with someone. In the case of our fourth sentence, it is with a friend, and in the case of the fifth, Yamada-san is consulting other employees. That means that to is also used to indicate company, in a sense, company. So the most important thing here is to remember that to is used most frequently as and after that as with to indicate a company or something that you are, let's say, finishing a certain action or performing a certain action with. Now we are moving on to ya. When it comes to the usage of ya in counting, it is absolutely necessary to keep in mind that there is a whole lot more objects in the list than presented here in our first sentence and in our second sentence. The first sentence, Gakko no kamoku wa reikishi ya kagaku ya sugaku nado ga suki desu, or when it comes to school subjects, I like history, chemistry, math, etc. And in our second sentence, Yakyū ya sakkar ya basket nado ga kirai desu. I hate baseball, soccer, basketball, etc. Perhaps there are at least 5 more school subjects that the speaker likes in the first sentence, and the same can be assumed for the sports that the speaker hates in the second sentence, perfectly illustrating why ya here is absolutely necessary. Or, in short, we can say that it is essentially the usage of ya to show a list of numerous objects in the background, with only a few serving as an example in our sentence. In the final complex sentence that I have just pulled up, we can observe the synergy between the particles and how each of them is contributing to the sentence here. Kare no dento teki na restaurant de Naomi-chan no tousan wa sushi ya teriyaki nado ga tsukuremasu. In his traditional restaurant, Naomi's father can make sushi and teriyaki, among other things. Please notice here the characteristics of each of the particles. No establishes the ownership here, the location for our transitive action. After that, va, the topic, ya, the inexhaustible counting, and finally ga to signify the ability of Naomi's father to do something, in this case to prepare food. Or, to be even more precise, in this case to prepare a whole lot more than just sushi and teriyaki. Now we are moving on to our next particle, and that is e, written with he, and it is likewise very simple to use. It marks a certain motion towards something or someone, and it can often be interchanged with the particle ni that we have learned previously without changing the meaning of the sentence. We will see this also in the examples that follow. Like its definition, the usage of e is simple. In our first sentence, Konshu no kaiyoubi ni Kobe ikimasu, we are marking Kobe as the destination of our movement that we will perform this Tuesday. And in our second sentence, Yugata Nakajima-san to juku e ikimasu, in the evening, I go to Juku with Nakajima. We are also doing practically the same. We are marking with e the destination of our movement. However, our third sentence, Sakura-chan e tegami o okurimashita, I sent a letter to Sakura, we see here the function of e in marking the recipient of our letter, in this case Sakura, but I would like here to mention that in marking the recipient with ni that we have learned previously, no mistake would be made and the meaning of the sentence would remain the same. Now, the final example sentence that we have, Natsuyasumi no aida ni nakama to sama risoto e ikimasu. During the summer holidays, I will go to the summer resort with my friends. We see here the testimony to the importance of particles in the Japanese language and how they modify the relationships between the other parts of the sentence as well as between themselves. Here, no once again forms ownership, ni the precise time point, to marks our friends, and finally e marks the goal of our motion. Finally, we have arrived to the most important pair of particles, made and kara, which are often found together when they illustrate a certain period of time and/or space, but are also found on their own with their particular functions to perform in a sentence. The first of the pair, made, is usually marking a certain limit or boundary, be it movement or thinking. As such, it is very flexible and can be sometimes even tricky to translate into English. In short, if you tie made with the meaning of a deadline or a certain limit, you will have no problems in mastering it through practice. The second of the pair, kara, is of course the polar opposite of made, and it is usually bearing a meaning of from something or someone, and in context it can also imply the division of something or someone. When it comes to the verbs of receiving, it usually marks the person from whom we have received something. Now we shall move on to the examples to see them in action and interaction with other particles we have learned up to now. Our first sentence, Shigoto wa 8 made desu. The work lasts until 10 o'clock is rather simple. With wa, we have established the topic of the sentence. In this case, it is shigoto or work, and with made, we have put a limit onto it, in a sense, showing the primary use of the particle to mark a boundary to which something is done. Our second sentence and third sentence have the same meaning, with the only difference being the type of boundary or extent. Our second sentence goes as follows. Byoin made kuruma de ikimasu. I go to the hospital by car. And our third sentence, watashi tachi no shikudai wa ashita made desu. Our homework is due tomorrow. Now, what type of boundaries are here to be observed? In our second sentence, it is a point in space, hospital, while in the third, it is a time limit, tomorrow, ashita. In our final sentence, we can see made among other particles. With wa, we have here established the topic of the sentence. With de, we have marked our means of transportation. And here made has been once again used to show a boundary, a certain boundary, and space. And the sentence goes as follows. Kyou wa eigakan made densha de ikimashita. Today I went as far as the movie theater by train. Now we are moving on to the examples with kara. When it comes to the basic usage of kara, our first two sentences show it in a customary synergy, so to speak, with wa that marks the topic of the sentence, regarding which kara provides us with more background information. The first sentence being, Omise wa koen kara toi desu ka? Is the store far from the park? Here the topic is the store, and the second sentence, Shigoto wa 9 ji kara hajimarimasu. The job starts from 9 o'clock. Here the topic being the job. Our third sentence, Itsu Kankoku kara kimashita ka? And our fourth sentence, Furui hon kara naraimashita, have essentially the same thing to show us, and that is that kara can stand on its own and that it does not necessarily require the presence of wa to function, because we can understand the topic of these two sentences from context. The final sentence of our set, ane kara presento o moraimashita, or I received a present from my older sister, illustrates the usage of kara with the verb morau, meaning to receive. Here, ane, our older sister, is marked with kara to signify that we have received a present from her. In case we want to add that it is us that have received the present, we only need to add watashi wa before ane kara. Now, the final section of the examples is the presentation of the synergy between various particles. These examples here serve to show the various ways they modify the elements in them and influence the relationships between different words in a Japanese sentence. From our first sentence, Naomi-san wa byoin de 8 ji kara 6 ji made hatarakimasu. Naomi is working at the beauty parlor from 8 to 6, we see here Kara and Made working together to show a certain period of time, with wa marking the topic and de marking the location of Naomi's work. After that, in our second sentence, once again Kara and Made show a time period with Getsuyobi kara Kinyoubi made Nagasaki no kaisha de Okayama-san to hatarakimashita. I worked with Mr. Okayama from Monday to Friday in a company in Nagasaki, but here we have three additional particles, no, de, and to, who also give us a little bit more information in this sentence. First, no is forming a certain bond between two nouns representing ownership, that is a company in Nagasaki. De marks them as the location of the work, and with to we are marking someone that we are working with. And our third and final sentence, 10時から1時まで小包を同僚たちへ送ります。From 10 to 1 in the afternoon, I will be sending packages to my colleagues. Once again, time period, we have o to signify the object and e to signify to whom these objects are going to be sent. Now we are moving on to our final section. With this finishing blow section, we have practically finished all of the most instrumental particles in the Japanese language. So once again, as it is the custom here at Igor's Dojo, I will give you a full summary of the last 5 particles that we have covered with our set. To is being the definite counting particle, and it also carries with itself the meanings of and with. After that, ya is used for indefinite counting, e as a marker for a destination of a certain motion or action, kara bearing the general meaning of from, and made to mark a boundary and or a limit, and also bearing the meanings of as far as and to. Otsukare-sama deshita, seikai no shokun. Now, we have reached the end of our particle study with this video, in which we have covered one of the more flexible and arguably one of the easiest particles in the Japanese language. Now you are fully prepared to analyze them even further or to practice them to perfection. In the future, I will be creating another dojo drill video for revision's sake, in which I will provide a quick rundown of the most important characteristics of each particle and a few more examples for you to practice. Once again, I would like to thank you for watching my videos, and I hope to see you again in the dojo next time. Sayonara!